Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Horses Now podcast, your go-to source for all things horse racing and training. I'm your host, Teague Ridge, and so excited to be joined once again by Kenny McPeek. Listen, Kenny, we got a very, very fun and exciting episode for our listeners today. We're going to talk about handicapping horses. Kenny, I know this is something you've told us, that you don't bet a whole lot, but I'm pretty sure you're probably an expert in this field.
I grew up reading the racing form when I was a boy, and that's kind of the key. If you're going to gamble, you need to know who to gamble on. And if you learn how to read the racing form or the Thorograph or the Ragozin sheets, even the Equibase sheets or the Equibase past performances, then you get an idea of how the game's played and what I'd call a lot of the inner details of the sport.
Yeah, totally get it. All right, so first question here, Kenny. The basics of handicapping. Can you explain the basics of horse racing and handicapping for someone maybe just new to the concept? What are the key factors are you looking at when you are looking at each race?
The first thing you do is you figure out what the distance of the race is, what surface it is. You want to take an analysis of the conditions, whether it's a maiden race, whether it's a never won two, an allowance race, claiming race, stake race. So there are what we call a list of conditions where we run fillies and colts, and then you want a horse that's in the proper category. And learning to read the racing form is actually pretty easy. It becomes second nature after you've worked it a while. But the basics is knowing what distance you're looking at, knowing what surface you're looking at, whether it's colts, fillies, and then figuring out what the competition level that they're presenting in that particular race.
So when you say competition level, so I'm assuming you mean kind of, is it a claiming race, is it a stakes race, all those different things, correct?
Correct. So I'm going to try to show everybody out there this is a condition book. Right now we're racing at Saratoga. We also have a condition book for Ellis Park. We've also got this is Oaklawn Park. They're way ahead of the game. They don't race until December, and they've already got their condition book out. So I'm going to open the condition book to what we call the index. So in the index, I'm going to see if I can show everyone. This is actually colts races, and this is fillies races. So I'm going to use the colts as an example here. You have 2-year-olds, you have 3-year-olds, you have 3-year-olds and up, and you have 4-year-olds and up. And it's the same for the fillies, categorized according to age. So when you do the 2-year-olds, in the 2-year-olds you have maiden claiming, you have maiden New York bred, maiden auction races for horses that are bought for less than $50,000. You have maiden special weight, stakes New York breds, stake grade 3s and grade 1s, and then you have distances. I don't know if you can see here, we have short and long.
Okay.
And so each racehorse, colts and fillies, has categorized according to age and distance. And then you're also going to see a little T in here, turf. And sometimes you also might see an A, which is all weather. Gulfstream Park runs a lot of all weather races. Turfway Park is all weather. But so you get different conditions for different horses. The older a horse gets, the more conditions there are to choose from. You've got maiden 20 claimer, 30 New York bred, 40 claiming, 50 claiming, 75 claiming. New York bred maiden special weight, which means that they all run with the same weight, and that is what I'd call it's a bigger money maiden race. Very good horses win the maiden special weight races, and then from there you've got never won 2, 16, and you can work your way all the way up to maiden 35, or never won 2 or never won 3 for 35,000, 50,000. Then you've got allowance conditions. The allowance conditions are a whole nother level too. It's not any different than graduating from first grade to second grade to third grade. You've got to work your way up till you get to college,
okay,
or pro.
Yep.
And then the better the horses, the higher the graded race. So grade 1 is the highest level. Mystic Dan winning the Kentucky Derby is a grade 1.
Got it.
Let's skip over to Ellis Park. Ellis Park has a similar index.
Okay.
Although they don't include New York breds in the Ellis Park book because obviously we're Kentucky breds racing in Kentucky. But there's added money for the Kentucky breds, and then the non-state breds run for a little less money because there are programs that incentivize racing so that we can grow the breeding programs within the states. So same type of deal here. 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, and 3-year-olds up. And notice in Ellis, they don't run 4-year-olds and up. So in New York, they run 4 and up, where Ellis, they only run 3 and up, or they use the straight 3s. So it's categories, and they're trying to figure out what category. You obviously Colts against Colts, Fillies against Fillies, sprinters against sprinters, route horses against rowdy horses, dirt, turf. It's a little complicated, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy to figure out.
I want to make sure our listeners are understanding here. So the books that you're holding up, what are those called?
These are called condition books.
Condition books. And now, are those for each track?
Each track has a condition book.
Okay.
It's not unusual for me to carry 4, 5, 6 different racetracks at one time.
Got it.
So the racetracks have to attract certain quality horses that fit into their program, and then those horses are brought to the races. And if they can't win, let's say a horse can't win a condition in Saratoga, they might go back and run at Ellis Park because it might be a little easier at Ellis Park. Or then from there, they could go to Prairie Meadows, or that could give you a list of other racetracks, Belterra.
Yeah.
But it's according to the level of competition. The tougher the competition, typically the more the money they give away.
And I do want to let our listeners who are listening from audio only, you can catch the video versions of these podcasts on the McPeek Racing YouTube. So just in case you want to kind of see these books that Kenny's holding up and you're just listening to us from an audio standpoint, you can catch us on YouTube. All right, Kenny, so a couple questions here. You spurred a lot of things there. Influence of track conditions. So conditions, you said surface is one of the big ones. So obviously dirt, turf, synthetic. How does that factor into your handicap decisions?
Well, some horses are bred for turf and some of them are bred for dirt.
How can you tell?
It depends on their that's kind of a deep dive. That's something that a horseman like myself is used to understanding, whether the sire was a turf horse or the mare was a turf horse or the family is a European family or even a South American family. But grass horses are usually made a little bit different. They're a little longer pastern. They might be a little flatter in their feet. But the truth is, a really good horse will run on about anything. And I think that American racing has evolved into dirt racing over the century. Mm-hmm. And dirt racing is predominant here, whereas in Europe, they pretty much run all turf. So it really depends. And what you do is you try to run a horse a few times and then figure out what surface they seem to be preferring. And then once you settle into a preferred surface, then you try to find the correct distance for that horse as well.
Okay. Perfect answer there. Now, what about speed versus stamina? Because obviously another thing you said is distance was a big thing you need to look at. So are you looking at horses that can run a longer, I mean, you watch the Olympics right now, right? So you've got your guys that are really good at the 100 meter dash, and then you got your guys that are doing the 1500 meter dash. And those guys look very different. They're different looking athletes. Your 100 meter guys look like football players. Your distance guys are more lean and long. Can you tell that in a horse?
For sure. When you watch a horse move through itself, I would say the longer they walk, the longer they walk. Well, horses have overreach. And so when the front foot lifts, the hind foot crosses. And we'll go into conformation probably in another episode one day. But sprinters are typically a little blockier. They are maybe smaller in the shoulder. They have a particular hind quarter that makes them quicker. And typically the pedigree. You really need to look at the pedigree on a horse to try to decide whether this is a sprinter or a router. And I do think that the angles of the thoroughbred, the longer, leggier horses, the distance horses, the shorter, blockier horses are more sprinter types. I myself prefer a horse with a little more leg to it. When I buy horses, that's what I look for. And I've had more success in distance races than I have sprint races, although on occasion I'll come across a good sprinter and we've had success there. But I do believe the longer a horse runs, the longer they run. In other words, the longer the distance, the slower the fractions in that race, which make it so it's a little bit easier to keep that horse healthy.
Okay, makes perfect sense. All right, what about the class of a horse? So how important is a horse's class when assessing its chances in each race?
Well, that's a really tough one because you really don't know how classy a horse is until you start rising up into the level of conditions.
Right.
If a horse wins its maiden, an allowance race, goes into a stake, and falters, then that horse might just not have enough class to go to the next level. And so you want to test the horse gradually up the ladder and see if they can handle it. The percentage of Grade 1 winners in the sport, very less than 1% of horses are Grade 1 winners. As a matter of fact, I think it's closer to 0.03%. I believe the number would be right, but don't quote me on that. But the very, very small numbers go to the highest level, and that's the class factor. Horses that can't do that will settle into the middle range conditions, whether it's claiming races, whether it's allowance races, and over a horse's career, a trainer's job is to figure out what level that they belong at. And horses have ceilings. Some horses can make it to the Grade 1 level. Very few though, but a lot of them can run in the middle range races and have a chance to earn money and win, whether it's in a maiden claimer or claimer, open claimer. But there's, once again, kind of like water seeking its level. When you run a horse enough times, you start getting a feel for where they belong.
Okay, so I know when I'm opening a racing form, I'm always trying to check out their past performances. What are the most critical elements of a horse's past performances that you focus on when making a pick?
Okay, so I've got a printed version of the daily racing form past performances.
Okay.
And this is what I learned on. And unfortunately, the daily racing form circulation isn't that high. It isn't as large as it used to be. But you can get them online. You can print these off. And so when a race is actually drawn, what they do is they'll put them in post position order. They'll put the horses on the what we call the PPs, past performances.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are not only daily racing form past performances, there are Equibase past performances. You have what we call the Ragazines. A Ragazine is a very different. They call it the sheets. This is actually the same race with two different versions of handicapping tools. They have the Thoroughgraph, which is another company that puts together numbers that dictate a horse's speed levels. And of course, these aren't exact. It gives the player an opportunity to maybe have a little edge over somebody that's just looking at the horses.
Right.
When you see the numbers, there are people that live by the Ragazines and live by the Thoroughgraph. And I myself have always been, I guess you could say, old school DRF.
Mm-hmm.
And the daily racing form, I'm gonna try to show you all this best I can. And this is actually a pre-printed, what they call the possibles for the Travers.
Okay.
And so I've got on here Dornoch, Mindframe, Unmatched Wisdom, Corporate Power, Torpedo Anna, Sierra Leone. I'm just going to use this one side.
Okay.
So a popular handicapping tool is these numbers right here. They're called the buyer figures. I'm old school. When I do that, when I say that, these numbers over here are called the speed rating and the variant. And I know it's probably really hard for people to see that,
Right.
but the speed rating and the variant, I've always believed if you add these two numbers up, you come with a number. The speed rating gives how fast he ran. The variant tells you how quick the racetrack was that day. So if the track was fast, really fast, the variant would be low. If the track was slow that day, the variant would be raised or higher. And what you do is you put these two numbers together and you come up with what I'd call a combined number. And a good horse runs good combined numbers. Like I can go through here on Torpedo Anna. She ran a 100 last time combined number. The race before a 97, the race before 97, the race before that a 101. The Kentucky Oaks she ran 97, 96, pretty consistent. Dornock up here ran a 100, a 98. He didn't run well in the Kentucky Derby. He only got an 81.
Mm-hmm.
He ran a 96 in the Bluegrass, and in the Fountain of Youth, he ran 102. So he ran a good race down there. So you try to, as long as those numbers, if you see a horse that's pattern numbers are higher than everybody else's in the race, the likelihood that's the one that's going to be favored. Skipping over to the Ragusins, and I don't have any Thoroughgraph numbers here. Their numbers are actually, the lower the number, the better the horse.
Okay.
And that, I think the Ragusins do a great job figuring out what kind of trip the horse had. In other words, let's say a horse got wide on both turns. That's not taken effect or into account in the daily racing form numbers. You might get a note in the column on the right side over here. You might get a note, whether they were inside, outside, rail trip, things like that. But in the Ragusins, they take into account, they add or subtract points according to whether or not the horse had an inside trip or an outside trip. And I do think that these are really effective. People really believe in these. In the case of Dornock, I'm going to see if I can pull him up. Yeah, he's the first one on here. He's been running his history, and they do it according to race dates here. But he ran a 9 in his race at Monmouth Park in the Haskell.
Okay.
Race before that, he ran a 7 in the Belmont. Actually, he ran faster in the Belmont than he did at Monmouth in the Haskell. His Derby race was poor, and his Keeneland race in the Bluegrass was poor. So those weren't his best numbers. And then you go over and let me see if I can dig up Torpedo real quick. So her numbers, she actually ran a 7- in her last race. And the same thing, the lower the number on the rag is in,
okay,
the better the horse.
Okay.
Horses that run down into the 0s and the 1s and 2s and 3s, those are exceptionally good horses. You can still have a very good horse that runs a 10 or 9. 7's very good. She ran an 8 and a 7 in her last 2 starts.
Okay.
And so we're trying to predict whether we fit in the Travers later in the month. And on paper, she fits. The fastest number in here is Fierceness.
Right.
And actually, Sierra Leone ran a 6.
Okay.
And so we're trying to figure out, and we think she fits. She's going to have to run to another level, but not much. She's right there on paper anyway. It's an interesting way to make decisions for us.
I really like the combined number of the speed rating and the variant. I think that's a really cool way to do it too. I think that's something that people can do. Yeah, it's dependable. I think that's a good way.
Well, the variant tells you whether your horse likes a slower track or a faster track. And I think that's important because sometimes the track comes up slow and sometimes it's fast and sometimes it's sloppy. And so you've got a lot of different surface angles that you're going to worry about. But ultimately, a good horse will overcome a lot of this, and they do seek their level condition-wise. If they're good enough, they'll get it done.
All right, Kenny, you're giving our listeners some pretty valuable info here. So let's talk about some betting strategies. Obviously, you can bet win, play, show, exactas, trifectas, supers. Which one do you think offers the best value for bettors?
Well, let's start this off as I don't gamble much. So
Right.
I'm actually not, I'm more worried about winning a horse race than betting on a horse.
Yeah.
And so I don't ever really put any thought into my odds and such. But when I do play, I bet a win show ticket. I like to bet a horse that's got a price that, if you get 10 to 1, 15 to 1. I ran a horse yesterday that was 49 to 1. And in my mind, she should have been 5 to 1. And she ran third. She paid 680 to show. And if I had bet win show ticket, I actually make money.
Absolutely.
And I'm a very conservative bettor. God rest his soul, my dad bet too much. I watched,
Yeah.
so I know better.
Yeah.
And I don't gamble too much. Every now and then I'll see a horse of mine that come over, and I'm a win place show ticket kind of person.
Okay.
One thing that I will tell people that play the sport, make a decision. When I say that, boxing a race, whether you're trifecta boxing or exacta boxing or late double box or daily double boxing, when you box a ticket, you're automatically giving half that money to the track or the pools.
Okay.
And so you're better off making a decision, in my opinion. You make a decision. Pick your winner, pick your second place horse or your third place horse. But when you box them, you're going to lose one of those tickets automatically, which takes money out of your pocket. You don't want to give them a loser automatically or give them a winner, however you want to look at it.
That's interesting. A lot of people box their tickets, so that's an interesting take.
People box their tickets all the time. I think it's good for the racetrack, but it's not really good for the player.
Okay. All right. So what about your strategy when betting long shots versus favorites? How do you decide when to back an underdog?
It's good to know the trainer. I think the trainer is much more important than the jockey.
I was going to ask that. Okay.
Well, and here's the deal. Jockeys will be overbet. There are people that come to New York and all they bet is Irad and Jose Ortiz.
Right.
Two wonderful young men, but they're overplayed here.
Yep.
I'm underplayed in New York because this is an away game for me.
Yeah.
I'm a Kentucky-based trainer. So when I'm at Keeneland, I'm probably overbet, or I'm at Churchill, I'm overbet, but I'm underbet in New York. And so you got to look at those kind of things. And then there are trainers that are exceptionally talented at, I guess you could say, sneaking one in, or they're getting a horse ready, and knowing the pattern of a trainer is a really big deal. There are guys that are phenomenal at winning first time out, and that's something that they focus in on. Steve Asmussen, first time out. Wesley Ward, first time out. Todd Pletcher, first time out.
Okay.
The guys that are bad first time outers are me, Wayne Lucas, Bill Mott. I mean, all of us win in single digit percentages first time out. That doesn't mean that we can't win, but I want to say that I know myself, I'm more of a progression trainer where I want a horse to run well and then a little bit better and then better.
Yep.
Whereas I don't want to fire my best shot first time out. I want to have a good shot. And if a horse wins irregardless, then I know I've got a really good horse in my hands. And then the next race, improvement. So trainer patterns are a big deal. Trying to keep track of the workouts and making sure that the horse has enough base under them. You're gonna see the workouts on the page, and I think the industry's doing a really good job lately keeping track of the actual workout times and making sure that the times are correct. And it's a tricky job, clockers, but the clockers are out there working hard every day to make sure that they're putting in the right horse in the right time. So you can use those workout times to help make a decision on who you're betting on.
So you don't necessarily think keying on combinations of jockeys and trainers make a whole lot of sense. It's more of the trainer than the jockey.
Well, good jockeys ride for good trainers, and good trainers have good owners.
Yep.
And there are some very talented jockeys that don't ride top horses, and there's some very, very talented trainers that don't have top horses. And there are trainers that have top horses that aren't very good trainers too, and there are jockeys that ride a lot of top horses, but they keep themselves. It's kind of like society, that keep yourself in good company and your horses in bad is an old racetrack saying, and it's important. You're only as good sometimes as the quality of stock that you have, and of course you have to produce with those horses, from my perspective, and some guys are better at it than others.
My grandmother, who just passed away at 101, she loved betting the horses, and her go-to was betting Pat Day. If Pat Day was riding, she was betting Pat Day. Like, you could just guarantee it. And she did pretty well with that strategy. But, it's interesting how people have different strategies on what they bet. And sometimes they latch onto a trainer or a jockey, and kind of that's their go-to.
Pat is a friend of mine, one of the finest people in the world. Pat was always overbet.
Yeah,
there wasn't a horse in Kentucky that he ever rode that wasn't overplayed.
Yep.
So he's not necessarily the ideal guy to be betting on, because everybody out there assumes he's on the best horse and that he's the best rider.
Right.
But even Pat would say that he was put on some really talented horses over the course of his career that he tries to stay out of their way. And as a gambler, I would have never bet Pat. Actually, I always thought he was a bit of a bet against.
Gotcha.
Because he was overplayed, but you had to find the right horse in the race that you thought could beat him.
Yeah.
And then you would get value on the other horse.
Right, because of the value. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Kenny, what about morning line odds? How much attention do you pay to the morning lines when handicapping?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I actually had a conversation with somebody here in New York the other day that I had a real question mark about the morning lines in New York. I think that the morning line, they're trying to predict what the odds are going to be when they reach the gate. The morning line guy in New York, the odds on my horse are always higher than I think they should be, because I'm not hard played here in New York, and I get that. In Kentucky, I'm probably overplayed. And so the odds maker really needs to, it's a tough job. I mean, for them to try to predict what the odds are going to be when they open the gate. And that's what their job is. That's just nothing more than a prediction of what the odds are going to be when the gate opens.
Right.
But the parimutuel pools actually dictate what those odds are going to be. And you could have one player walk up to the window and throw the odds all off. I mean, I had a client one time, he used to bet 5,000 across before anybody came to the paddock, and the horse would open at 1-9.
Yeah.
And then the odds would gradually go up and up and up and up. I'm always trying to talk you about it doing that.
There's a guy in the Kentucky Derby, the pillow guy or the mattress guy. I forget what it was. He'd always change the odds. He'd bet some couple $1 million on something, and the odds would change. It was always interesting to see how that worked.
It's hard to move the pools Derby Day.
Yeah, it is hard to move the
pools. The pools are really big.
Yeah.
And for those out there that don't understand pools, horse racing, we have parimutuel wagering, which is a French system that was brought here, and they can dictate the takeout, so they know what percentage of every bet they're going to make money on. And the takeout's important, because the higher the takeout, the less attractive wagering on that particular track is. The lower the takeout, the more money that comes back to the player over a long-term play or long-term playing at a particular track. And tracks spend a lot of time analyzing how high or low their takeout should be. And that's where parimutuel wagering comes in the sense that they don't build racetracks by losing money. They build them obviously by making money. They have a lot of bills to pay and a lot of infrastructure and purses to pay out. And then horsemen get a percentage. It's typically a split with the racetrack. They split the profits, and half the profits go into purse money, and the other half goes back into the track.
So that being said, Kenny, there's this conspiracy theory that a lot of these races are fixed. Is there any truth to that? Never.
When I was a young trainer years ago, I don't think, I'm talking about in the 80s, they had television cameras. Every race is recorded.
Oh, yeah.
Today they're in high definition, where the stewards can go and actually zero in on any move that a jockey's making. Jockeys are fined if they don't make a 100% effort. No, it doesn't happen.
Okay.
And trying to fix the horse race is nearly impossible, because think about it. If you've got 10 horses, I'm going to use a 10-horse field as an example, and sometimes we'll run 14. In Europe, they run 20. How many horses are going to cooperate? How many jockeys are going to cooperate? And how many owners and trainers are going to cooperate?
Right.
And if everybody cooperated and they're betting on the horse that was win, the pari-mutuel pools change the odds on everything. So nobody can make any money because the pools are going to dictate what the payout is.
Sure. And
so really cashing a ticket really is dependent on the trainer knowing his horse is right and ready. Like in my case, if I've got a horse that's right and ready and a few friends call me, it's not unusual. Hey, look, play this one today.
Right.
But I'm also handicapping the race and looking at the past performances and saying, I can win this race because I think my horse is going to improve. But as far as the other horses laying down and letting me win, not happening. Not happening. There's too much money on the line.
Yeah, makes sense.
Like we're running for I think today, it's like $48,000. That's a ton of money. I mean, I can remember winning my first small race, and the purse was $3,100.
Right.
I think we made $1,800 to the winner. That's a really cheaper race. But today, I think smallest purse I'll run in all year might be $20,000.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, all that makes sense. All right. So post position. I know they make a big deal about that at the big races, at the big kind of the stakes races. How significant is a horse's post position in a handicapping process?
Can be a big deal. Yesterday, I ran a horse here in Saratoga that drew the 10, and if she'd drawn anywhere else, she probably wins. She got hung wide on the first turn. Jockey did a good job cutting the corner on the second turn, but the winner cut the corner on the first turn, cut the corner on the second turn, and got to the wire about 2 lengths in front of us.
Okay.
And so that was a race that was lost because of it. Brian Hernandez won the Kentucky Derby for me this year because he took the shortest trip home. He cut the corner with Mystic Dan, and of course the rest is history.
Yep.
If he had been 1 or 2 paths wide in either turn, we do not win that race. And so yes, it matters. He drew the 3 hole. And when horses have to go wide and wider, then there's definitely ground lost. And what you've got to do is get a jockey that understands that he needs to save ground. And depending on the horse you're handling, that some horses can overcome it. Some horses can loop the field and win anyway. But if you're in there with a marginal chance, you better save every inch of ground, and that comes from the post position many times.
So, Kenny, you mentioned you have buddies that have called, and you said, hey, you need to bet on this one today. Have you ever been dead wrong, where you told some people to bet on somebody, and then the horse just went out there and laid an egg?
Many times. Oh yeah. I mean, a lot can happen. It's such an inexact science.
Sure.
You have so many factors. Horses don't handle dirt in their face, or they stumble leaving there. It's definitely a game of failure. But I've seen horses that work bullets in the morning and just look like rocket ships in the morning.
Yeah.
And then in the afternoon they just don't show up. And
right.
We call those morning glories.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
you try to figure out those sometimes. It's hard.
All right. So last question here, Kenny, and then I want you to talk about a couple of sponsors we have for today's episode. Blinkers, Lasix. Now, obviously, I think we'll do a deep dive into both of those, but how big of a deal should bettors put into those type of things?
Well, I am not a big blinkers person. Let's just do one topic at a time.
Okay.
I've never trained a really, really top horse that needed blinkers. I'm very sparingly using them. I think a good horse looks another horse in the eye, and if they're good enough, they go ahead and get it done. And I'll try blinkers, but I haven't had what I would call a huge success changing the blinkers on. I think a horse can't see his entire environment. Like I don't run 2-year-olds with blinkers because I want them to see the entire environment so they learn.
Yeah.
Here's why you're out here, and here's everybody around
Sure.
you,
Right.
and then they learn to handle the adversity. If you want horses to show a little more speed in a race, there are those that believe put blinkers on. But if they show more speed, they won't show as much finish. So it's kind of a catch-22 there,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
So I'm going to venture off into a story about a very famous horse and a very famous trainer. So when I was a young trainer, I was stabled next to Lucian Lauren.
Mm-hmm.
And Lucian Lauren and I became fast friends over the summer. And I would go to the rail every morning and listen to Lucian. I wanted to anything he could tell me I was interested in. And he says, let me tell you about Secretariat, Kenny. Of course, young trainer.
Oh, yeah.
I'm all ears.
Ears
right?
perked up on that one. Sure.
So I said, yeah, sure, Lucian, I'd love to hear it. He said, Kenny, he came in from Florida or from South Carolina, and he said he was fat, he was lazy, wouldn't hardly train. All he wanted to do was sleep and eat. They finally started getting him going. He got a little stronger. He was training a little better, and said he went back to the barn one day, and he was talking to Miss Shinnery. Said, Miss Shinnery, this Bold Ruler colt out of the Prince Aquilo mare, Something Royal, if you could get $25,000 for him, you ought to sell him. He said, this horse, all he wants to do is sleep and eat. And Miss Shinnery says, noted, okay. So, of course, the time went by, and Lucian says, one of the riders said, boss, why don't you add some equipment? And at that time, they had been breezing him, and he hadn't worked fast. He just worked slow, and he really the light bulb hadn't come on.
Okay.
And so he said, I added a set of blinkers, took him over the starting gate, and they worked him out of the gate, and he worked 59 and change. For those that don't know, 59 and change, extremely fast work.
Right.
And he said he was out on the rail, and he ran back to his office to call Miss Shinnery. Said, Miss Shinnery, you didn't sell that horse yet, did you? She said, no, Lucian, I didn't sell him. Good. You ought to keep him. Secretariat.
Wow. So blinkers changed the game there, huh?
Blinkers changed all the business. Amazing. But that was a real interesting summer for me because I had probably 8 of the worst horses in my career. And then Lucian was next to me with he had 4 Secretariat fillies in the barn. And I'm a sponge around the older trainers, especially when I was younger. I became an older trainer.
Right.
And of course, naturally. But that was fun. I've been around Alan Jerkins and a long list of really, really talented guys.
So at some point, Kenny, we'll dive into the Lasix, and that's probably a longer conversation. But you want to
hit a little bit.
Yeah, why don't you hit on a little? Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So I always believed that Lasix was a more dehydration water fluids than anything. And I, as a young trainer, actually tried Lasix. And I took 2 Lasix tablets and I tried to run a mile around a racetrack in the sand.
You took them yourself?
Yes.
Okay.
And I lost 18 pounds of water weight that day. And this is when I was skinny, Kenny.
That sounds like a weight loss tip here, Kenny. Okay.
I probably didn't weigh 210 pounds back then. And of course I'm 6'2", 6'3". But I realized that for me, it didn't make me run better. As a matter of fact, it made me weaker. And so as a horse trainer, I really have always been somewhat against it.
Okay.
But it was so prevalent in the sport for so long that I'm going to tell you, well, you felt like you were at a disadvantage if you didn't use it. And I think that trainers in the early years back in the 70s and 80s were using it for horses' water weight to go down.
Right. So
because they will lose 20, 25 pounds of water weight coming out of a race. And that weight is, something they have to carry. And can it make a difference? Yes. but the dehydration factor post-race, it takes longer for a horse to recuperate. And because it takes longer to recuperate, you can't run them as often.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so I've always been kind of like, okay, cut back. Well, so quickly, I had an owner, wonderful man, Ray Cottrell. And Ray Cottrell was always, his nickname was Running Ray.
Mm-hmm.
Ray liked to run his horses. When we were claiming horses, we ran them often. And sometimes too often for me. I'd have to talk him out of racing. And Ray, I told Ray, I said, I'm not going to give Lasix because I can run the horse back quicker. And Ray didn't care. Ray just wanted to win.
Yeah, right. He wanted the horse to run.
And so what I learned is that I could take – veterinarians at the time were treating horses with anywhere from 5 milliliters to 10 milliliters of Lasix. And what I would do is I would claim a horse and I would drop it to a half a milliliter, so it was minimal, and yet the horse was still listed on Lasix. And we had one particular horse named Crafty Cash that we won a list of races. I think he was allergic to Lasix.
Okay.
And there are some horses that get reactions from Lasix, especially fillies.
Yeah.
Because fillies, it affects their electrolytes, it affects their I think hormones and ovaries. I've always felt like fillies did better without Lasix.
Okay.
Today, so many of these big races are run no Lasix, and I think we're learning that it's not as important as it is thought to be. There are those that believe it saves bleeders. Mm-hmm. I've seen horses bleed through Lasix. I've seen horses that didn't run any different with it or without it. Mm-hmm. So it's a little tricky, and you know, there's a group of people out there who would argue with me that we need Lasix and racing, but they don't use Lasix in Australia, England, Ireland, France, Japan, Hong Kong. Why is it that the thoroughbred in America needs Lasix, but the thoroughbred in international countries don't need Lasix? So I'm a no Lasix guy. I'm fine with it. If a horse is bleeding regularly, they need to be rested, and that's what we do.
Fascinating stuff, Kenny. All right, so let's talk about our sponsors today.
Well, we're fortunate enough. Fasig-Tipton's kind enough to give me regular gear all the time, and a great place that I like to shop for yearlings. But thank Anna Seitz at Fasig-Tipton for the shirt, and then Denali Stud, one of the best horse farms in Central Kentucky. They let me wear their cap on a regular basis. I always thought I looked good in white and blue, but you know, somebody argue that. But thanks for Fasig-Tipton and Denali Stud.
Kenny, what a great podcast today.
Our first sponsors, by the way.
Our first sponsors of many to come. Thank you so much for a ton of information. I feel like our listeners are going to get so much value out of today's podcast, out of all the podcasts we've done. So, Kenny, what's your famous sign-off?
I'll see you at the races.
See you at the races, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Horse Races Now podcast. Whether you're a seasoned racing enthusiast or new to the sport of horse racing, download the Horses Now app and listen to our podcast every week.
Never miss the race.